Greetings and good Friday morning. Make sure I got my time right. 22nd of July in the third decade of the 21st century, 2022. I always say that as a bit of a preamble because I'm always somewhat fascinated by what society is talking about, at least in America, what's considered normal versus where people predicted. So, if you're new to my channel, I always kind of do a bit of a preamble. Also, if you're new to my channel, part of the reason I started this a couple years ago is because first and foremost, I needed an outlet for me to just kind of vent some of my thoughts and opinions. Like anybody else who exists, uh, I guess you could say I feel entitled to my thoughts and my opinions. I mean, to deny anybody that sense of internal entitlement, I think is just wrong. Uh, I basically teach for a living, I think is the best way to put it. And the last thing I want to do is indoctrinate people with my thoughts and opinions when it has nothing to do with the core curriculum that I'm required to teach. Secondly, when I started recording these videos, before I published them, I started to do a good hard look at seriously? Is this our thing now? I started to do a good hard look at my demeanor, and I came to the conclusion that I think I'm a good person. I think I'm a rational person. I think I'm a productive member of society. I just, I think and feel this way. Well, equally and opposite, what if there are people who have the same thoughts that they're good, they're rational, they're productive members of society, but their thoughts and beliefs are different? So why should I be dehumanizing them and demonizing them? And then I started looking at the media, which I already didn't trust, and I was like, the general impression I get is that the media outlets are essentially dividing us. They're basically presenting stories in a one-sided, biased fashion, in order to push a narrative that basically creates sides, a left versus right, red versus blue. And I feel like we're better than that. Don't you? Don't you feel like we're better than that? Say hi, Ginger. Not going to say anything? Well, as distracting as she can be, I'm going to try and get through this. So it's not that I haven't been on, it's that I've had some problems with my publishing software. This particular laptop, for some reason, the publishing software doesn't like to include the audio. So it's just video, and then it looks like, right? Are you looking at the camera? No? So I'm going to take this raw footage to my other laptop and see if I can publish it. That being said, this one's kind of going to be all over the place, just sort of a catch up, if you will. On the nerdier side of things, my wife and I watched The Expanse. That was good. Uh, then from there, we went into Alias. Alias was good. I enjoyed that. It took me a while, and I don't know if it was because it was dated, and I don't even know if that's a fair comparison because it was early 2000s. But I remember the show getting a lot of push, I think is the best way to put it. So we watched that. That was kind of cool. Um, Having watched it late, I got hints of the Da Vinci Code, and I'm trying to think of something else. Not like the X Files, but so like there was this fictitious Milo Rimbaldi character that was a big through line for Alias, but that was enjoyable. Now, somewhat, I'm not really embarrassed, but for some reason I feel like I need to be. Now we're watching Gilmore Girls. Now I watched it to some degree when it was on. I wouldn't say religiously, but I watched it. I'm not going to deny, I think Lauren Graham is gorgeous. And there was just something about the storytelling that, even though there were parts I couldn't wrap my head around, like I've never been rich, I've never had that kind of privilege. Um, there was just certain parts of the story I can relate to, like finding your own way, doing your own thing, not being completely accepted. Really, for some reason, I really enjoyed Scott Patterson's Luke. Um, and let's not forget, that's where I discovered Jared Padalecki, who would then go on to Supernatural, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I have not finished Walker, I want to say season two. We've just been caught up watching other stuff, and I haven't finished The Flash, the most recent season, because like I said, we've been binging other stuff. I think for no other reason than to get ready for the con, which is well, it starts next Thursday, but for us, we'll be there Friday. Super looking forward to that. And what I'm going to try and do, if at all possible, is I'm going to see if I can film some of it, if I can find a way to film some of our experience and see if I can publish that and see if that could be interesting between wrestlers, voice actors, illustrators, and artists, and then, of course, actors and actresses that'll be there. So hopefully that'll be kind of interesting. On the socio-political side of the house, and I don't know if this is fate, but I was trying to express myself with regards to Roe versus Wade. And in doing so, that's when mysteriously and magically the publishing software would omit the audio, and I no longer had audio. The shortest version is this: I don't have much of a dog in the fight. If you had to push me for my opinion, I think to some degree there should be a designated amount of time for a woman, which means you have to accept that biological women exist and that biological women are the only ones that can get pregnant. But I digress. That a woman has a certain amount of time to, in essence, shit or get off the pot. And I don't mean that to be crude. I just mean, simply put, that there's a limited window of opportunity, I think, and I hate the way that sounds, but I feel like we should have some sort of parameters in place on when a woman can decide to terminate a pregnancy versus when she's waited too long. Um, I think in some of the most, I think some states may be a bit hyper conservative, which is why I have a tendency to resist that label because of the hyper conservatism. But I do believe most states that are looking to put in place anti abortion laws are willing to include health of the mother, health of the baby, rape, incest, things that most people could wrap their head around. Conversely, a lot of people have talked about this, except for the people that need to be talking about this. So a lot of commentators and pundits have commented that in the Constitution there is no amendment regarding a abortion. So it's not an existing right, which what the Supreme Court is supposed to do is analyze, debate, and rule on the constitutionality of certain laws. So Roe versus Wade was bad constitutional law, in which case, especially our elected officials that are either getting ready to run for office or whatnot, their level of ignorance is I would say borderline impeachable. Because if you're an elected official whose job it is to essentially work with laws, work with rights and whatnot, then you know the only way to deal with this accordingly is to ratify an amendment to the Bill of Rights in the Constitution of the United States, designating abortion as a right. Since it does not exist on the books, all the Supreme Court did was say, well, this has no business at this level. We're going to push it back down to the states because as of right now, it doesn't exist in the Bill of Rights of the Constitution. So all our elected officials have to do is ratify a new amendment, get it through the House, get it through the Senate, get it signed by the president, and if it becomes an amendment to the Constitution, then it becomes a right that the Supreme Court can then review as a constitutional law. But it doesn't exist right now. So that's really about all I have to say on that. In more sardonic, sarcastic, dark views, in my walks in life, there are people that probably should have been aborted because they've squandered the gift of life and they have no business reproducing. So um, if you go a little bit deeper and you research the origins of abortion and Margaret Sanger, racist eugenicist, it's fascinating some of the arguments being made versus the historical background of abortions. Moving beyond that, I'm trying to think of what else has been popping off recently. I once said a long time ago, right around the time that the elections took place, that I'd be very interested to see how long President Biden lasts before uh, he's deemed non compos mentis. And I was serious at the time, uh, but I honestly didn't know if he would last this long, and I really didn't know how it would play out because I really didn't anticipate him gaffing so much and so badly. Um, I know people didn't like Trump. He didn't win the personality contest, but I just don't know how we can get behind Biden. The man falls off a bike. He pulls a Ron Burgundy. I mean, whatever. On that note, here's why I brought it up, because I was watching Dave Rubin, and he was interviewing Patrick Bet some Bet David, Iranian immigrant and whatnot, successful businessman, and he said something that kind of, I don't want to say struck a nerve, but it made a tremendous amount of sense. So he talks about some of his experiences being an Iranian immigrant and how no matter what we do in life, we are constantly judging each other. We are constantly making assumptions about each other. It's just a fact of life, and he's not wrong. If you actually stop for a minute and look at life as a whole, and I've spoken about this more than once, as individuals, we resist the idea of other people labeling us, but reserve the right to label ourselves. We resist the opportunity for people to put us into groups, but yet at the same time, we form our own groups. We just naturally segregate ourselves and form our own groups. It's an unfortunate fact of life if you examine the scope of man. And when he said that, we naturally judge each other. Just learn to get over it. He's like, he talks about dealing with people, right after 9/11, and people were very kind and courteous, but said, due to recent events, I'll be honest, I don't know that I'm comfortable dealing with you. Is there somebody else we could deal with? And he was like, sure, no problem. Where under today's America, he should have thrown a fit, he should have gaslit them, he should have doxed them, all these other things. And he's like, why? Where does that get anybody? And then they further, between him and Dave Rubin, they further talk about things that are going on, like whether it's uh, social media, whether it's entertainment, whether it's the news, like The View and whatnot, and all these people on the left who are operating under the assumption that they own the rights to be outraged. They have a monopoly on outrage. And they talk about how all these people on the left are slinging accusations, and they're labeling people, adversely labeling, and accusing people of reduced mental capacity, rationale, just ignorant behavior, because they're Trump supporters or because they're pro life or whatever. And what I find funny is they're absolutely right. Is the level of what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, the level of hypocrisy, where it's like, okay, only we on the left reserve the right to shame and label people and talk down to people and insult people, but we are impervious. Therefore, we are not allowed to be equally ridiculed. So, in other words, what goes around is not allowed to come around. All right. So basically, they're allowed to do this, and they're allowed to insult large populations of this country who just don't necessarily line up 100% with the left. Okay. And they're allowed to insult, mock, make fun of, but at the same time, they apparently have established the fact that they own the high ground and nobody's allowed to return the favor in kind. And I was just astonished by that because I've been talking about that off and on for at least a couple years now, where I'm just blown away at the hypocrisy, where it's like, oh, you people on the right are so bad. Like, if you're not with them, then you're a Nazi. If you're not with them, then you're a white supremacist. If you're not with them, then you're a right winger. I mean, these are some pretty denigrating labels to be thrown around. These are some pretty divisive terms to be thrown around by people in positions of influence. And I think when you put it like that, that's what drives people like me who don't normally give a shit. That's what normally drives us to start thinking about what side we're going to be on, or whether or not we have a side, if we've already chosen a side, whatever the case may be. Because th- that level of rhetoric is pretty divisive, it's pretty insulting, it's extremely negative. And then equally watching the responses to when, oh, okay, well, you're all those things. You're a bad person. How dare you? How dare you? I'm such a good person. Everything I say is pure gold. Nothing I say is infallible. That level of hypocrisy is what drives a lot of people, I think, in my opinion, towards the right. And not only that, but the way that they eat their own, the way that the left internally destroys and eats their own is what pushes people to the right of center, when in all actuality, we should be striving to find the center. We should be striving to find common ground. And it was just something that kind of blew my mind. And I agree. I agree. I despise the left, whether or not it's because they're represented by the Democratic Party, and I despise the party just in namesake and history alone. Um, and I despise the hypocrisy. Um, I'm not a big fan of media outlets due to their implicit bias, which is guaranteed to them through the First Amendment, because the First Amendment is supposed to protect freedom of the press, freedom of speech, which means they're not owned and controlled by government entities, which is supposed to allow them unbiased reporting, free of government influence, so that they don't become a propaganda arm of the government. In which case, ironically, that's exactly what's happened. The overwhelming majority of media outlets have become a propaganda wing for the left, with the one exception being Fox News, which is the propaganda wing of the right. But I digress. So, and just to give you an idea, right, the level of hypocrisy. So, you can't define a woman and trans this, trans that, and then all of a sudden, when it comes to abortion, a biological woman is definable. I find that to be hypocritical. Or, okay, defund the police. All police are racist. Which apparently all cops must be white, which we know that's not true, but whatever. So all cops are racist, but at the same time, they're the only ones that should be carrying guns. That's I don't understand that. So, and also, if a cop shoots somebody, immediately it's a racial act, when the people making these accusations have never once in their life been an officer of the law or served in the military and know what it's like to want to protect yourself and your fellow soldiers, service members, law enforcement officers, etc., or innocent people. Equally and opposite, if a member of law enforcement shoots an active shooter, he's a hero. But if a private citizen legally and lawfully owns a firearm and shoots that active shooter, that that person's a vigilante, because once again, only cops should be allowed to own guns. And then, of course, apparently all active shooters are on the right. They're Trump supporting right wingers, which I find funny because lately the shooters have not been right wing at all. It's just, if you can be the first one to establish the lie as truth, then you can be the first one to establish the lie as truth. So these are just some thoughts. And as you can imagine, this is why I'm trying to go in a much nerdier direction, because unfortunately, as my channel has demonstrated, there are certain topics that by their very nature, they're just there's no middle ground. There's no discussion to be had. It devolves into a tremendous amount of ignorance. It demonstrates a high capacity for narcissism, egocentrism. I mean, some people, and I say that with some humility because my channel um, earlier this year started to get some traction over a video I made. It was purely coincidental, and I started to get some traction, and I started to get people involved, and people were starting to comment, and I was broaching other subjects, and I was getting comments and feedback, and for the most part, it was okay. Then I broached one subject that I meant to broach innocuously, but it struck a nerve with somebody. And they planted their flag, they put their feet, firmly in the sand. They took up arms and they wanted to go to war. And they attracted others to their cause. And it devolved quickly. And if you actually, depending on who you are, if you have no bias in this, if you actually, and if I show you some of the other communications, the level of narcissism, egocentrism that devolved from the fallout is amazing. And it's also extremely disappointing because I was trying to build bridges. And with some people, there's no bridges to be built because I will admit, I'm pretty firm on some of my opinions. I'm willing to listen. I never ever promised to agree, and I never ever promised that I would change my mind. I'm willing to listen, and I may change my mind, but I've never made a guarantee or a promise. So I don't know if people were operating under false pretenses that I was promising something else, but it it devolved quickly. So again, I'm going to try to balance out the socio-political stuff, but like anybody else, there's things that happen that just blow my mind and they frustrate the hell out of me, you know. But I think where some of us can find common ground is nerding out about certain subjects. And when all of that negativity happened, one person came back to the table, and I'm terribly grateful because that person demonstrates clearly that they have an open mind, that there are subjects that are very sensitive to both of us, all right, that there are subjects that perhaps maybe we won't see eye to eye on, but there's no value. There's no there's nothing to be gained by dehumanizing each other. There's nothing to be gained by ridiculing and unnecessarily criticizing one another under the pretense that there's something to gain when in reality there's none. So one person came back. I'm terribly grateful, and we've been trying to nerd out about certain things, and it's been a lot of fun. And hopefully, I'll get this whole audio thing corrected, and hopefully, um, I will not only get it published, but I will also find a way to film my experiences at the con with the family. The only thing I can't do is we're not allowed to bring anything to Smallville Nights. I reserved a ticket for Smallville Nights, uh, and we're not allowed to bring anything in that. So, with that being said, my channel's wildly unpopular, so I don't really care whether you like, unlike, subscribe, hit the notification bell. I'm not about that. My channel's not monetized. It's not a big deal. What I am more interested in is leaving comments, seeing if we can establish dialogue. If you just happen to stumble upon this and you've made it this far, whether we agree or disagree, I don't care. It's just having the dialogue. And I'm only really interested in people who are willing to have open discussions versus your atypical internet trolls who I don't know. I don't want to use labels unnecessarily, but people who may be on the left don't work for a living and have nothing but an abundance of time to troll people on the internet. I don't care. Oh my God, I don't care. All right. I I just don't. But for those that want to get involved and have conversations and establish dialogue, whatever label you want to give me, whatever. Um, you want to call me conservative, right wing, whatever. All right. If you want a more established base, I'm not a card carrying Republican because ever since the Republican Party got in bed with big business and the 700 Club, I'm not a very church going person. So I believe in certain principles that the Republicans represent, like civil liberties, civil rights, and small government. Beyond that, I'm not a big fan of our two-party system because of how much it's influenced by large corporations. And as far as the Republican Party goes, I'm not a big fan of how much it's influenced by the church. That's just my 2 cents. We fought a civil war between the Confederate South and the Union North, which was essentially Republican versus Democrat. And um, I feel like the Democratic Party should have been abolished at the conclusion of the Civil War because of everything they represented. Um, there are certain liberal concepts that are represented by the Democratic Party that I'm okay with, but just in namesake and historical context alone, I despise the Democratic Party. So if that kind of helps establish a basis for you, I'm probably somewhere between an independent and a classical liberal with conservative leanings. Like I'm conservatively liberal, liberally conservative. So use that how you want. Big fan of freedom of speech, big fan of the Second Amendment, just a big fan of the tenets of the Constitution. And I also don't believe that in the third decade of the 21st century that America is as bad or worse as it was in the 1960s and earlier. I think we've come a long way. I think a lot of it, to be honest, I'm going to pat myself on the back. I think those of us born in the 70s, all right, my generation, Generation X, I think we had a lot to do with some positive progress. All right. So that's where I stand. You want to get involved? You want to, have these conversations by all means, whether it's nerdy, sociopolitical, I don't care. It's an open channel. All right. It's here for people who want to have discussions, right? People who need an outlet, people who need to connect with somebody. If you feel trapped in your inner circle, reach out. Not guaranteed to agree with everything, but reach out and I will attempt to converse with you so that you don't feel so isolated and alone. And if you do that, you're awesome. You ready, Ginger? Hey, everybody, welcome back. It's still the 30th of June, 2022, third decade, 21st century. This one's quick, real quick. Uh, does the left have a monopoly on outrage? Does the Democratic Party, the liberals, the left, do they have a monopoly on outrage? Are they the only ones who can do certain things and not be held accountable? But then, equally and opposite, if the right, conservatives, whatever label you want to use, people that are not even affiliated are fed up and they react and they respond, whether physically, verbally, whatever the case may be. Why is it in the court of public opinion they're always wrong? Now, here's my olive branch. I don't know how to phrase this, and I'm probably going to butcher it. I'm not left. I'm more right of center. There's some topics I'm probably left of center. I'd like to consider myself center. Party, I despise the Democratic Party just on principle alone, going back to their founding and the Confederacy. I don't believe in the party switch. Republicans, not in love with them. Okay? I probably could find plenty of flaws with Abraham Lincoln since he's most directly associated with the Republican Party, even though it was founded by, I want to say it was Frederick Douglass, who was a black man, but Lincoln was the first presidential candidate and then subsequent president. But I digress. Um, so I'm not necessarily a card-carrying registered Republican. I think I'm registered as an independent. So that being said, I'm sure there are plenty of examples where if you are on the left, if you are left of center, you're probably hypersensitive to and could probably easily cherry pick examples of outrage from the right. I'll be completely honest, like legit no shit hate groups, like white supremacists, they may identify as on the right, but I don't know that anybody who's right of center accepts them. Where, and here's where it all comes together. Your individual perception is your reality. Now, perception is not always 100% reality, but how you perceive things, which is you receive, you interpret, you process. So how you perceive things is what shapes your reality. In the world of Dan, it seems as though the left has a monopoly on outrage. The left owns the cancel culture mob. The left owns outrage culture. The left is the only one that's allowed to do certain things. In my last video that I'm waiting to finish up here, I asked the question: celebrities who are left leaning, politicians who are left leaning, and or Democrats, when they say and do things of a certain nature, why is it okay for them? But if a Republican or Tea Party or whatever who's not aligned with them, not affiliated with them, if they do it, it's an atrocity. It's not just not okay, but it's like legal action has to be taken. All right, it's blown out of proportion. Again, my perception, my reality. So I'm just curious, all right? And if it's only two or three of you that respond, so be it. And this doesn't have to be whether you agree or disagree with me, whether we're friends or not. I'm just curious, are you somebody who, yeah, it's also my perception, my reality, my opinion that the left does own this. It is a monopoly. It is an unfair, imbalanced thing. Or I'm on the left, and here's 1,000 examples that counter your thought process. Hey, cool. All right. I'm not saying they don't exist, and maybe it is exposure. Maybe the things that I'm exposed to makes it feel as though it is unfairly balanced. Um, I'll go one step further. I'll try to spike the pot just a little bit more. All right. I'll see if I can spike the punch bowl just a little bit more. So only one political party has ever had an extreme and divisive viewpoint of humanity. It started prior to the Civil War, which led to the succession and led to the Confederacy and led to the initiation of the Civil War. And that was the Democratic Party. They were pro white, they were anti POC, they were pro slavery, they were anti civil rights. They consistently filibustered any and all legislation that sought to equalize America for everybody. I understand people are of the belief that the Republicans and the Democrats switched. I will say this: it's my belief, based on my ability to read books, uh, that the Democratic Party, starting with Lyndon Johnson, switched up strategies. All right. So when the actual cotton plantation was gone, they created the welfare plantation. But I digress. Um, my point being is that it's always been of my opinion that the Democrats' platform as a whole is divisive. Now, modern day Republicans have a lot to account for as well. I'm not 100% thrilled with them. All right. You can have your church, you can have your Bible, but I don't know that religion has its place in politics. But that's my opinion. We can differ on that. The smartest thing I heard was, I think, from a guy named Dave Murray. I could be wrong on the name, but he says he's a Christian atheist because he doesn't deny that he was born and raised in a Judeo Christian society, as in all of our foundational values, all of our foundational beliefs stem from a Judeo Christian culture. Whether you physically go to church and worship, whether you physically go to synagogue and worship, culturally speaking, we are a Judeo Christian society. So he basically said, I am a Christian atheist. I don't believe in the church, I don't believe in God, but all of my morals, my ethics, my foundational values come from Judeo Christian values. So, um, that being said, getting back to my original question, is it fair or is it unfair? Does the left have a monopoly? Do they physically own it? Or do you think no, it's equal and balanced? Either way, I'd like to hear from you. Okay. So, with that being said, uh, I'm out of here. If you leave a comment, that's great. It gets the conversation going, and you're awesome.